The insistent thumping sound started as a dull murmur, barely noticeable over the excited thrum of my car engine as I reversed out of the driveway. It was like a big, clumsy squirrel trapped inside a wall, scratching and bumping. But then it grew louder, more frantic, turning into a series of muffled bangs. A high-pitched, almost animalistic shriek, thin and strained, pierced through the garage door. My foot hesitated on the brake pedal, a chill tracing its way up my spine. It was a woman's voice, no doubt about it. A familiar, yet utterly desperate sound. A sickening wave of realization washed over me, cold and sharp. Brenda, the self-proclaimed empress of our neighborhood's homeowners association, the notorious HOA Karen herself, was somehow, impossibly, trapped inside my garage. And I, her unwitting jailer, was moments away from embarking on a week-long fishing trip, miles from home, with no intention of looking back until Sunday afternoon. The last vestiges of her muffled cries faded as I pulled away, the automatic garage door slowly, silently, lowering into place behind me, sealing her in. A wave of nervous energy made my hands clammy on the steering wheel, but I pushed it down, convincing myself it was just a strange echo, a trick of the wind, or perhaps a mischievous cat. Surely, it couldn't be what my gut screamed it was. Could it? Life in the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Willow Creek was, for the most part, a pleasant dream. My name is Alex, and I'd lived in my cozy little bungalow for nearly 10 years. It was the kind of place where kids still rode bikes down the sidewalks, where neighbors waved from their porches, and where the smell of freshly cut grass often mingled with backyard barbecue smoke on warm evenings. I loved the sense of community, the feeling of belonging to something bigger than just my own four walls. I worked from home as a graphic designer, which meant my days were usually filled with creative projects, punctuated by walks with my golden retriever, Buster, and tending to my small, but proud, vegetable garden. I believed in being a good neighbor. That meant offering a hand when someone needed it, whether it was helping Mr. Henderson carry his groceries or babysitting the Miller twins when their parents had an emergency. It meant keeping my property neat, but also understanding that life sometimes threw curveballs, and perfection wasn't always possible. My philosophy was simple: a little kindness goes a long way, and empathy makes the world a much better place. When you understand why someone might be struggling, or why their yard might not be perfectly manicured for a week or two, it's easier to offer help than judgment. This approach had always served me well, creating a network of friendly faces and willing hands whenever I needed them too. However, not everyone shared my sunny outlook, and not everyone believed in understanding over rules. And that, dear friends, brings us to Brenda. Brenda was the reigning president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. She wasn't elected, not really. She'd simply declared herself president about 5 years ago, after the previous, much more laid-back president moved out of state. Brenda was, to put it mildly, a stickler for the rules. And not just the big, important rules like no loud parties after 10 p.m. Oh no, Brenda focused on the small things. The very small things. Her house, a pristine, almost sterile-looking white two-story with nary a leaf out of place, stood as a monument to her rigid adherence to every single line in the HOA handbook. Her lawn was a perfect green carpet, her flower beds symmetrical and devoid of even a single errant petal. And she expected everyone else's property to match her exacting standards. Daily, sometimes twice daily, she would patrol the streets in her golf cart, a clipboard clutched in her hand like a scepter, her sharp eyes scanning every lawn, every mailbox, every potted plant. She wasn't looking for beauty, she was looking for infractions. I remember the great gnome wars of last summer. My neighbor, Mrs. Perkins, a sweet elderly woman with a twinkle in her eye, had placed a charming family of ceramic gnomes around her rose bushes. They were whimsical, colorful, and brought a smile to everyone's face. Everyone, that is, except Brenda. Within hours, Mrs. Perkins received a formal letter from the HOA, citing unapproved lawn ornamentation and threatening a hefty fine if the gnomes weren't removed within 48 hours. Mrs. Perkins was heartbroken. I, along with several other neighbors, banded together. We all put gnomes in our yards, tiny acts of rebellion against Brenda's tyranny. It was a silent protest, a way of saying, we live here too, and we like our gnomes. Brenda, surprisingly, backed down that time, but she never forgot. She just shifted her focus. Another time, old Mr. Jenkins, who had recently had knee surgery, accidentally left his garbage cans out for an extra day after collection because he was too sore to bring them in. Brenda, instead of offering to help him, sent him a nastygram about unsightly refuse bins. I happened to be walking Buster when I saw him struggling, and I immediately brought them in for him. He was so grateful, and I just couldn't imagine being so cold-hearted as to complain about something like that, especially when a neighbor was in pain. That's just who Brenda was, rules over people, always. My interactions with Brenda were usually brief and strained. She'd glare at Buster if he sniffed a particularly interesting patch of grass on her perfectly manicured verge. She'd eye my slightly overgrown lavender bushes with a look of disdain. Once, she even sent me a formal warning because a single dandelion dared to sprout in my front yard. A single, solitary dandelion. I just sighed, pulled it out, and tried to remember that everyone has their own struggles, even if Brenda's seemed to revolve around immaculate lawns. My approach was always to comply, politely, and then get back to my own life, avoiding direct confrontation. I knew arguing with Brenda was like trying to reason with a brick wall, utterly pointless and exhausting. This week, though, I was looking forward to a break from all of it. Work had been particularly demanding, and a 5-day fishing trip to Lake Thunderbird had been on my calendar for months. I'd packed my fishing gear, stocked up on snacks, and made sure Buster was all set for his stay at my sister's house. The idea of waking up to the sound of birds instead of Brenda's golf cart, and spending my days casting lines into the tranquil lake, filled me with a deep sense of peace. My car was packed, the last-minute checks were done, and the only thing left was to pull out of the driveway. As I was locking the front door, Brenda's golf cart, of course, rounded the corner. She slowed down, her eyes narrowed, taking in my packed car. She probably thought I was fleeing the scene of a major HOA violation. I offered a small, polite wave, hoping she'd just drive by. No such luck. She pulled up to the curb. "Going somewhere, Alex?" she asked, her voice a little too sweet, a little too curious. "Just a fishing trip, Brenda." "Much needed," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. Her eyes drifted to my garage door, then back to me. "I just saw a stray cat dart into your garage, Alex. You should be careful. They can get into all sorts of mischief, you know. Make a mess. And the rules about pest control are quite explicit." She gave me a pointed look, as if I had intentionally invited a feral feline rave into my sacred garage space. I frowned, confused. A cat? I didn't see one. Buster would have barked. Buster, thankfully, was already safely tucked away at my sister's. "Oh, it was quick," she insisted, giving me a knowing nod that implied I was either blind or a liar. "Just thought I'd let you know. Wouldn't want any unapproved inhabitants now, would we?" She emphasized unapproved inhabitants as if referring to a secret cult hiding in my toolshed. "I'll just take a quick look myself, if you don't mind. Just to make sure there are no other issues before you leave." Before I could even respond, she was already out of her golf cart, marching towards my garage, her clipboard still clutched like a weapon. My garage was mostly just tools, some camping gear, and a few boxes I hadn't gotten around to unpacking from when I first moved in. Nothing exciting, certainly no stray cats. But Brenda, with her insatiable need to poke and prod into everyone's business under the guise of HOA vigilance, was unstoppable. I figured it was easier to just let her look than to argue. Besides, I was already behind schedule for my trip. I watched as she tried the side door, found it locked, thankfully, I'm diligent about security, and then marched around to the front, peering into the small windows on the garage door itself. Can't quite see clearly, she muttered, tapping on the glass. She then noticed a small, rarely used manual release cord near the side of the garage door frame, a relic from an older opener that was still there. I had replaced the main opener years ago with a fancy smart one controlled by my phone, but that old cord just hung there, ignored. Suddenly, without asking, Brenda reached up and gave the cord a sharp tug. There was a click, a whirring sound, and the garage door, which I had closed manually after packing, began to slowly, deliberately, rise. My eyes widened. "Brenda, wait. What are you doing?" I exclaimed, starting to walk towards her. I had already activated the smart garage door closing sequence on my app as a final security measure, which meant it was set to close automatically after a short delay, regardless of the manual pull. I'd forgotten to disable it, or even to consider someone might manually open it. She ignored me, stepping inside, her head swiveling, eyes darting left and right, inspecting every dusty corner as if searching for a hidden lair of rule-breaking squirrels. "Just checking for that cat, Alex. And making sure your storage is up to code," she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. She probably wanted to see if I had too many boxes, or perhaps an unapproved lawnmower. "Brenda, I really have to go," I shouted, but she was already deep inside, her figure disappearing behind a stack of old tires. I had to get going. My fishing buddy, Frank, was already waiting at the lake. With a sigh, I decided she'd eventually come out. I pressed the automatic close button on my car's remote, a habit I had developed to secure the garage from the convenience of my vehicle. The garage door began its slow, inevitable descent. I heard a faint, annoyed "hey" from inside, but I was already backing out, my mind filled with images of shimmering lake water and the thrill of a big catch. I didn't look back to see if she was still inside, assuming she'd come out or step away from the closing door. I was too eager for my vacation, too focused on the open road. As my car cleared the driveway, the garage door hummed softly, finally sealing itself shut with a gentle click. I glanced in the rearview mirror just in time to see the last sliver of light disappear, the garage now a dark, impenetrable box. And then, I hit the highway, leaving Willow Creek, Brenda, and all my troubles behind for a blissful week of fishing. The faint thumping sound I thought I heard as I drove away. Just the wind, I told myself. Just the wind. Chapter 2. The heavy thud of the garage door as it sealed shut plunged Brenda into an immediate, suffocating darkness. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, the sound echoing in the silent space, like a giant, hungry beast swallowing her whole. She blinked, waiting for her eyes to adjust, but there was nothing. No sliver of light, no friendly glow from a window, just thick, inky blackness that pressed in on her. "Alex," she shrieked, her voice bouncing off the concrete walls, sounding strangely small and frightened. "Alex, open this door right now." She stomped her foot, a sharp, angry sound that got lost in the vast emptiness. She strained her ears, listening for the familiar rumble of Alex's car, the sound of the door opening, anything. But there was only silence. A deep, heavy silence that felt even bigger than the darkness. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at her. She fumbled wildly in the dark, her hands slapping against the cold, smooth metal of the garage door. She knew there was a handle, a way to lift it manually, but in the panic, her fingers couldn't find it. She slammed her fist against the door, hard, then harder. "Let me out. This isn't funny," she yelled, her voice growing hoarse. Her mind raced, a jumble of angry thoughts about Alex's carelessness, about her own important schedule, about the sheer nerve of being trapped in this dusty, disorganized space. She hated disorganized spaces. Everything had its place in Brenda's world. She tried to remember what she had seen when she first stepped inside. There were boxes piled high, old tools hanging on pegboards, a faint smell of oil and something vaguely musty. But now, it was just a black void. She tried her phone, pulling it from her purse. The screen glowed briefly, a small beacon in the overwhelming dark, showing a battery icon with a tiny red sliver. Dead. She'd forgotten to charge it. A fresh wave of fear, colder than the last, washed over her. No phone. No light. No way out. She was truly, completely alone. She called out Alex's name again, softer this time, a little desperate. The silence that answered was chilling. She slumped against a cold metal shelf, listening to the frantic pounding of her own heart. Meanwhile, miles away, the sun sparkled on the calm surface of Lake Thunderbird, turning the water into a shimmering carpet of diamonds. The air smelled of pine trees and fresh water, a clean, wonderful scent that filled your lungs and made you feel truly alive. I cast my line, the little lure flying gracefully through the air before landing with a gentle plop. The soft sound of the water lapping against our small fishing boat was the only noise, apart from the occasional chirp of a bird or the distant call of another fisherman. "This is the life, huh, Alex?" Frank, my fishing buddy, said, his voice low and peaceful. Frank was a big guy with a kind smile and a laugh that boomed like thunder. He loved fishing as much as I did, and our yearly trip was something we both looked forward to all year. "You got that right, Frank," I replied, a deep sigh of contentment escaping my lips. No deadlines, no emails, no HOA meetings. I chuckled, the thought of Brenda and her clipboard feeling impossibly far away, like a bad dream from another lifetime. It was easy to forget about dandelions and mailboxes when you were surrounded by such quiet beauty. We spent the morning like that, just fishing. The fish were biting, which made it even better. We caught a few small bass and a couple of decent-sized trout, carefully putting them in the cooler. Frank told me about his grandkids, and I told him about a funny thing Buster did last week. It was simple, easy conversation, the kind you have with someone you truly trust and enjoy. We shared a thermos of hot coffee and some sandwiches I'd made, and the sun warmed our faces. It was the perfect escape, exactly what I needed. Every now and then, a tiny, fleeting memory would flicker in my mind, a weird sound as I drove away, a momentary confusion, but it was quickly pushed aside by the peace of the lake, by Frank's steady company, by the sheer joy of the moment. I just wanted to relax, to let go of all the worries from back home. And I truly believed I had. Later, as the afternoon sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples, we headed back to our cabin. It was a rustic, cozy place tucked away in the woods, with a small porch overlooking the lake. Frank started a fire in the outdoor pit, and we grilled the fish we'd caught, the smell of sizzling trout mingling with the smoky scent of burning wood. We sat there, watching the stars begin to pop out in the darkening sky, feeling tired but happy. I thought about how important it was to have moments like this, to step away from the busy parts of life and just be thankful for simple things, good friends, fresh air, and a delicious meal. It made me think about empathy, about how everyone, even people like Brenda, probably had moments when they just wanted to escape, to feel that same peace. It was a nice thought, a gentle reminder that even when someone seems difficult, they're still a person, just like you. Back in Willow Creek, the setting sun brought with it a noticeable chill inside my garage. Brenda had spent hours stumbling around in the dark, bumping into boxes, tripping over tools. Her initial anger had slowly, terribly, changed into a gnawing fear. Her throat was raw from yelling, her hands sore from pounding on the door. She tried to find the emergency release handle inside the garage, the red cord that hung down, but in the absolute darkness, she couldn't locate it. She thought she felt something like a rope, but it turned out to be a tangle of old Christmas lights. She even tried to push against the door with her entire body, but it was like pushing against a mountain. She hadn't eaten since a small breakfast hours ago, and hunger pangs gnawed at her stomach. Her mouth felt dry, her lips beginning to crack. She remembered the big jug of water she had seen Alex carrying out earlier, probably for his trip. It was ironic, cruel even, to be trapped so close to water yet be so terribly thirsty. As the night deepened, the concrete floor grew colder, seeping into her bones. She shivered, wrapping her arms tightly around herself, trying to make herself as small as possible. The darkness felt heavier now, filled with unseen shadows and imagined noises. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, sounded magnified, menacing. Then, a new sound. A soft, scratching noise, close by. Her breath caught in her throat. She held absolutely still, straining to hear over the frantic thumping of her own heart. The scratching came again, closer this time, followed by a faint scuttling. A shiver of pure terror ran down her spine. A mouse? A rat? The thought of being trapped in the dark with unseen, possibly scurrying, creatures made her stomach churn. She hated rodents. She hated anything that wasn't perfectly in its place. The fear was no longer just about being trapped, but about what else might be sharing this cold, dark prison with her. She closed her eyes tightly, wishing for morning, for light, for anything but this suffocating dread. But morning was still so many hours away, and Alex wouldn't be back for an entire week. The horrifying reality of her situation truly began to sink in. She was truly, utterly, alone, stuck in a cold, dark box, and no one would even know she was missing until days, perhaps even a whole week, had passed. A gasp escaped her lips, a tiny, broken sound in the vast, echoing silence. The darkness that swallowed Brenda whole never truly lifted through the long, terrifying night. It was a thick, heavy blanket, pressing down on her, making every breath feel hard to take. The chill from the concrete floor seeped into her very bones, making her shiver uncontrollably, even when she huddled in a tight ball. Every shadow seemed to twist and stretch into something frightening, and the soft, scratching sound she'd heard earlier came back, closer this time. She imagined tiny, beady eyes watching her from the corners, tiny claws scuttling across the floor. She hated mice and rats, absolutely detested them. The thought of them being near her, in the pitch black, made her skin crawl. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible, trying to disappear from anything that might be moving in the darkness. Her throat felt like sandpaper, dry and scratchy. Her stomach growled loudly, a painful, empty sound that echoed in the quiet garage. She tried to swallow, but there was no spit, just a raw, burning feeling. She thought of Alex's big water jug, sitting somewhere out of reach, maybe right next to her, yet utterly unavailable. It was a cruel trick, to be surrounded by the things of a normal life, yet be completely cut off from them. She tried to yell for help again, to scream until her voice was heard by someone, anyone, passing by outside. But her voice was just a weak rasp, barely a whisper. It was like trying to shout through a thick wall of cotton. No one would ever hear her. No one would even know she was here. The anger she had felt at first, that furious heat directed at Alex for his supposed carelessness, slowly began to cool, replaced by a cold, dreadful realization. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was serious. This was real. She was truly, utterly, completely alone. She wasn't in charge here. She wasn't holding a clipboard. The HOA rules meant nothing. The only rule that mattered now was survival. A tear, cold and unwelcome, slipped down her cheek, leaving a clean trail on her dusty face. It was the first time in a very long time that Brenda had felt so helpless, so truly vulnerable. The silence of the garage swallowed her small, broken sobs. She just lay there, shivering, waiting for a morning that felt like it would never come. She felt a distant car pass on the street outside, its engine hum a cruel reminder of the free world beyond her prison, a world that continued on without a thought for Brenda, trapped in the dark. Far away, at Lake Thunderbird, a new day dawned, painting the sky with soft pinks and oranges. The air was crisp and fresh, smelling like dew-kissed leaves and cool lake water. I woke up feeling wonderfully refreshed, my body still a little tired from yesterday's fishing, but my mind clear and happy. Frank was already up, making coffee on a small camping stove. "Morning, sleepyhead," he boomed, a wide grin on his face. "Looks like another perfect day for fishing." We had a quick breakfast of scrambled eggs and bacon, cooked over the crackling fire, the smell making my stomach rumble happily. It was simple food, but it tasted amazing out in the fresh air. After cleaning up, we decided to explore a hiking trail that wound through the woods around the lake. The path was covered in soft pine needles, and the sunlight filtered through the tall trees, making pretty patterns on the ground. We saw squirrels scampering up tree trunks and heard the cheerful chirping of unseen birds. It was so peaceful, so quiet, so completely different from the busy sounds of Willow Creek. As we walked, Frank told me a story about his childhood, about how he and his dad used to go camping in these very woods. He talked about how important it was to be kind to nature, to leave things better than you found them. His words made me think about how we treat each other too, not just the environment. It made me remember my own belief in kindness and empathy. It felt good to be surrounded by such simple, honest goodness. The only rules here were the rules of nature, and they felt right and fair. Every now and then, a tiny, almost invisible flicker of unease would pass through my mind, like a small, buzzing fly. It was too vague to put my finger on, too fleeting to worry about. Maybe it was just the feeling of being away from my familiar routine, or the strange sense of time slowing down when you're on vacation. I just pushed it away, focusing on the warmth of the sun on my face, the scent of pine, and the good company of my friend. I didn't realize that my peaceful escape was Brenda's terrifying nightmare, a cruel contrast that would make sense only much, much later. We found a small waterfall, its water tumbling over mossy rocks with a gentle roar, and sat there for a long time, just listening to the soothing sound. Life felt good, simple, and far, far away from any HOA troubles. When morning finally, agonizingly, arrived in my garage, it didn't bring the relief Brenda had so desperately hoped for. The darkness hadn't completely lifted, it was more like a thick, murky twilight, with only the faintest gray light filtering in through the tiny windows high up on the garage door. She could see vague shapes now, distorted and eerie in the dimness. But the slight increase in light only brought a new, dreadful problem. As the sun rose higher in the sky, beating down on the roof and the metal garage door, the air inside began to heat up. Slowly at first, then quickly, the garage transformed into a giant, suffocating oven. The air became thick and heavy, hard to breathe. Sweat trickled down Brenda's face, stinging her eyes, and her mouth felt even drier than before, her tongue thick and swollen. The hunger and thirst were no longer just discomforts, they were sharp, stabbing pains. Her head throbbed, and a dizzy spell made her sway when she tried to stand up. She tried to find something to drink, anything. She stumbled over a garden hose coiled in a corner, hoping against hope that water might somehow flow from it. But it was dry, utterly useless. Her mind, already fuzzy from fear and lack of sleep, started to play tricks on her. She thought she saw shadows moving in the corners, larger than any mouse, twisting into shapes that looked like long, spindly legs or glowing eyes. She heard whispers, faint and taunting, just at the edge of her hearing. Her imagination, fueled by panic and dehydration, was turning my ordinary garage into a chamber of horrors. In her desperate search for water, she tripped over a small, forgotten metal toolbox near the back wall. She cried out as she fell, her knee hitting the cold concrete with a sickening thud. A sharp pain shot through her leg. As she scrambled to push herself up, her hand landed on something sharp, something that pricked her skin. She recoiled instantly, pulling her hand back with a gasp. In the gloom, she couldn't see what it was, but she knew it was dangerous. A cold, oily liquid began to spread across the concrete where she'd fallen, giving off a sharp, chemical smell. She'd knocked over something hazardous, something that smelled like paint thinner or engine cleaner. The fumes were strong, making her head spin even more, her eyes water. She instinctively tried to crawl away from the growing puddle, but her injured knee screamed in protest. Brenda, the woman who ruled with an iron clipboard, was now lying on a cold, concrete floor, her leg throbbing, her throat burning, surrounded by unseen threats and toxic fumes. The overwhelming heat made it hard to think, made it hard to breathe. The realization of her true peril hit her with a force that stole her breath. She wasn't just trapped, she was in grave danger, completely helpless, and completely alone. She tried to push herself up, to get away from the foul-smelling liquid, but her body felt weak, her mind clouded. She collapsed back onto the floor, her vision blurring, the faint light from the garage door windows fading to black. She just lay there, a crumpled heap, the air getting hotter and hotter, the fumes getting stronger, and no one, absolutely no one, knew she was there. Brenda woke slowly, her head pounding with a pain so fierce it felt like a drum was beating inside her skull. The air was thick and heavy, smelling sharp and nasty from the spilled liquids. Her throat was on fire, rough and aching, and her tongue felt swollen, too big for her mouth. When she tried to move, a wave of dizziness swept over her, making the dim shapes in the garage spin and wobble. Her knee throbbed where she'd fallen, a dull, constant ache that made her want to cry. She felt weak, weaker than she had ever felt in her life, like all the strength had been drained out of her body. She realized she was still lying on the cold concrete floor, a little distance from the puddle of smelly liquid, which was good. But the heat was unbearable now, like she was trapped inside a giant oven. Sweat poured down her face, making her feel even more sticky and uncomfortable. Her mind felt hazy, like a thick fog had settled in her brain. She found herself muttering to herself, strange little phrases about rule violations and perfectly trimmed hedges, words that seemed to float away into the hot, heavy air. She looked around, trying to make sense of the shadowy shapes. A large, dark form in the corner looked like a monster ready to pounce, but then it wobbled and became a pile of old newspapers. Her eyes were playing tricks on her, making everything look scary and confused. Her thirst was a torment, a burning fire in her belly. She desperately needed something to drink. She slowly, painfully, dragged herself across the dusty floor, her injured knee protesting with every inch. Her fingers scraped against the cold concrete. She looked for anything, anything at all, that might hold even a single drop of water. She peered into old buckets, hoping for rainwater, but they were all empty. She even licked the cold metal of a rusty tool, hoping for moisture, but it only tasted metallic and dry. The thought of water, cool and clear, was a dream that made her ache. She saw a dusty, old jug in the very back, half hidden behind a mountain of boxes. With a surge of desperate hope, she crawled towards it, her muscles screaming in protest. It was an old plastic jug, probably for oil or car fluid, but in her blurry vision, she imagined it holding cool, life-giving water. She pulled on it, but it was heavy, bolted to the floor. It was hopeless. Meanwhile, the days at Lake Thunderbird continued to be a balm for my soul. It was day 3 of my trip, and the rhythm of the lake had completely taken over. The sun was warm, the air was clean, and the fish were still biting. Frank and I spent the morning out on the boat again, casting our lines and sharing stories. We talked about silly things, like the biggest fish we'd ever caught, and serious things, like what it truly means to be a good person. Frank told me about a time he helped a stranded motorist on a lonely road, even though it made him late for an important meeting. "It's always better to lend a hand, Alex," he'd said, "than to rush by. You never know what someone else is going through." His words reminded me of my own wish to be kind, to always try and understand others. That afternoon, we decided to visit a small, sleepy town nearby, famous for its homemade ice cream. The little shops were friendly, and the people smiled and waved as we walked by. I felt completely relaxed, miles away from the worries of home. My phone, which I had deliberately kept mostly off to truly unplug, buzzed once or twice with notifications, but I ignored them. I didn't want anything to pull me back to the world of deadlines and, frankly, HOA complaints. I figured if anything important was happening, Frank would tell me, or my sister would call about Buster. Everything felt peaceful and calm, exactly what a vacation should be. The tiny, fleeting whispers of unease I'd felt before had vanished entirely, replaced by the happy hum of a truly good time. I bought a postcard for Buster, a silly one with a fish wearing a hat, and laughed out loud at the thought of him seeing it. We ate our ice cream cones by the lake, watching a family of ducks paddle by, their ducklings following in a neat little line. It was such a simple, perfect moment, and I truly felt grateful for it. I thought about how lucky I was to be able to enjoy such peace, to have such a good friend, and to be so far away from the kind of worries that Brenda seemed to create for everyone. It never once crossed my mind that while I was enjoying my double scoop of chocolate chip cookie dough, Brenda was facing a very different kind of sweetness, or rather, the terrifying lack of it. Back in the oven-like heat of my garage, Brenda's condition worsened rapidly. The fumes made her cough, a dry, painful cough that racked her body. Her throat was so raw now it hurt to even breathe. Her vision swam, and the shapes in the dim garage seemed to twist and dance, sometimes even taking on the faint outlines of people she knew, judging her. She was hallucinating, her mind struggling under the extreme conditions. She thought she heard Alex's voice, calm and polite, telling her she was violating an HOA rule, even though she knew he wasn't there. Her injured knee was swollen and stiff, making it impossible to walk properly. She could only crawl, dragging herself inch by painful inch. The hunger was a constant, sharp claw in her stomach, and the thirst was agonizing. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her tongue feeling like a piece of wood. She was weak, disoriented, and starting to lose hope. She knew, deep down, that she couldn't last much longer without water. In a desperate, feverish attempt to find some way out, she spotted a small, high window, just a tiny sliver of glass near the top of the garage door. It was too high to reach, but next to it stood a tall, wobbly stack of old cardboard boxes. They looked unstable, ready to topple at any moment. But for Brenda, in her confused and desperate state, they looked like her last chance. She knew it was risky, that the boxes might fall, that she might hurt herself even more. But the thought of another minute in this hot, suffocating prison, without a drop of water, was more terrifying than any fall. With a surge of fading strength, she began to pull herself up, using a nearby shelf for support, her hands shaking. She slowly, painfully, began to climb onto the wobbly stack of boxes, her injured knee screaming in protest with every movement. The boxes shifted precariously beneath her weight, leaning dangerously. She reached out, her fingers outstretched, aiming for the tiny window, hoping to bang on it, hoping to smash it, hoping to attract attention. But as her weight settled on the very top box, it wobbled violently, then began to sway. With a terrifying groan of ripping cardboard and a loud, crashing sound, the entire stack of boxes began to collapse beneath her. Brenda screamed, a weak, hoarse sound, as she plummeted downward into the dark, hidden space behind the falling boxes, a space filled with unseen dangers. Her scream was swallowed by the hot, silent garage, and then there was only the sound of splintering wood and rustling cardboard, followed by a sickening thud. A blinding flash of pain, then darkness. Brenda lay crumpled amidst the scattered cardboard and dusty, sharp fragments of what felt like broken wood. Her head was spinning even more violently now, and a new, agonizing pain shot through her arm, making her cry out, a weak, desperate sound swallowed by the suffocating heat of the garage. She tried to move, but her body felt heavy, uncooperative, like a broken doll. The fall had knocked the wind out of her, and her lungs burned with every shallow, painful breath she took of the hot, chemical-laced air. She could feel something wet and sticky on her arm, and a terrifying thought, cold and clear despite her hazy mind, crept into her consciousness: she was bleeding. The terror of the unseen creatures from the night before seemed less important now than the very real threat of her own body giving out. Every muscle ached, her joints screamed in protest, and the gnawing hunger and thirst were sharper than ever. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the blurry, menacing shapes around her, trying to wish herself away from this nightmare. But the heat was relentless, pressing down on her, stealing her last reserves of strength. Her mind drifted in and out, flashes of her perfectly manicured lawn, her pristine house, then the harsh reality of the concrete floor and the smell of dust and despair. Time had lost all meaning. Was it still day? Had another night passed? She couldn't tell. All she knew was the endless, crushing heat and the terrifying, empty silence. Meanwhile, Lake Thunderbird sparkled under the afternoon sun, unaware of the quiet horror unfolding miles away. It was day 4 of my trip, and I was feeling more relaxed and refreshed than I had in months. Frank and I decided to try a new fishing spot we'd heard about, deeper in the quiet coves. The water was incredibly clear there, and we could see schools of tiny fish darting through the underwater weeds. It was so beautiful, so peaceful, that it felt like another world entirely. We spent the morning fishing, and the trout were biting like crazy. We caught so many that we decided to keep only what we needed and release the rest, carefully putting them back into the cool lake water. "Give a little back, Alex," Frank said, as he gently let a shimmering trout slip from his hands. "Nature's been good to us." His simple words resonated with me, reminding me of the importance of being grateful and generous, not just in nature, but in life. It was a philosophy I truly believed in, one that brought real joy. Later, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with fiery streaks of orange and purple, we sat by the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The crackle of the fire, the distant hoot of an owl, and Frank's booming laugh filled the air. I felt completely disconnected from my regular life, from the constant hum of work emails and the petty squabbles of the HOA. There was a moment, just a fleeting whisper of a thought, about my house, about Buster, about how they were doing. But it was quickly replaced by the warmth of the fire and the comforting weight of Frank's hand on my shoulder as he told another funny story. It was easy to forget the small, annoying things when you were surrounded by such profound peace. I just kept reminding myself that being fully present, fully enjoying the moment, was a gift. Back in the suffocating heat of the garage, Brenda's body was failing her. The pain in her arm, her knee, and her head was constant, a fiery agony that made it impossible to find any comfort. Her throat felt completely closed, and her tongue was so swollen it barely fit in her mouth. She hadn't had a single drop of water, and the dehydration was stealing her consciousness, pulling her into a dark, swirling fog. Her thoughts were no longer clear, they were broken pieces, floating in and out. She hallucinated more frequently now, seeing Alex's face floating in the dimness, then disappearing. She heard whispers of HOA rules, then the mocking laughter of unseen figures. She knew she was dying. A chilling certainty settled over her, quiet and absolute. All her life, she had been strong, in control, always telling others what to do. Now, she was utterly helpless, completely at the mercy of the suffocating heat and her own failing body. She tried to cry out, but only a dry, rasping sound escaped her parched lips. She saw the old garage door opener, a large, dusty box on the ceiling. There was a thin wire hanging from it, the emergency release cord she tried to find in the darkness on the first night. It looked like a tiny, fragile thread, almost out of reach, but it was there. With a final, desperate surge of will, Brenda tried to pull herself up. Every movement was a monumental effort, a battle against her own weakening body. Her injured arm screamed in protest, and her knee buckled beneath her. She knew this was her last chance, her only hope. She slowly, agonizingly, crawled towards a stack of old tires, hoping to use them to get closer to the dangling cord. Her hands, scraped and bleeding, scrabbled against the dusty rubber, trying to find a grip. She was so weak, so dizzy. But the image of water, cold and clear, propelled her forward. She reached for the wire, her fingers trembling, barely able to grasp it. She pulled with all her might, a desperate, raw strength that came from the deepest part of her fading will. There was a loud, straining groan from the garage door opener above, a mechanical whine that sounded like something was about to break. And then, with a sharp, terrifying crack, the single, flimsy wire snapped in her hand, leaving her with nothing but a worthless piece of cord and the chilling sound of silence. Brenda collapsed back onto the concrete floor, her last thread of hope broken, the darkness beginning to claim her once more as the heat pressed down, suffocating and relentless. Brenda lay still, a crumpled heap on the hot concrete, the faint light that filtered through the high windows barely touching her. The pain in her arm, her knee, and her head was a constant, throbbing drumbeat. Her throat felt completely sealed shut, her tongue a thick, useless lump in her mouth. She hadn't had a single drop of water in what felt like 100 years, and her body was shutting down. Her mind, once so sharp and focused on rules and order, was now a swirling fog of confused thoughts. She saw faces float before her eyes, Alex's, then Mrs. Perkins with her gnomes, then Mr. Jenkins with his forgotten trash cans. For the first time in her life, she felt a strange, cold clarity. All her rules, all her demands, all her judgments of others, they meant nothing here. Kindness. Empathy. Those were the things that truly mattered, she realized, in a fleeting, desperate moment. Not perfect lawns or symmetrical flower beds. She felt a deep, chilling regret, a feeling she rarely allowed herself to experience. She had wasted so much time being angry, being critical. Now, there was only the suffocating heat, the awful smell, and the terrifying silence. She felt herself slipping away, the edges of her vision darkening. She thought she heard a faint, distant hum, like a giant bee, but it was just her mind playing tricks. She was dying. The thought was not even scary anymore, just a dull, heavy fact. The long drive back from Lake Thunderbird was filled with a different kind of happiness. It was Sunday afternoon, and the sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the highway. My body felt wonderfully tired from days of fishing and hiking, but my mind was refreshed, clear, and calm. Frank had dropped me off at the edge of town, and I was making the last few miles to my house, feeling a warm, familiar pull towards home. I thought about Buster, wagging his tail excitedly as he saw me, and about my cozy living room. My phone, which I had kept mostly silent for the trip, buzzed with a few missed calls from my sister. Probably just checking in on Buster, I thought. She's always so worried. And a couple of texts from Linda, my sweet neighbor across the street. Something about missing me. It was nice to be missed. I smiled, thinking about how good it felt to return to my quiet, friendly neighborhood. I imagined the fresh smell of my garden, the soft light of my porch. The vague, unsettling feeling I'd had when leaving had completely vanished, replaced by the simple joy of coming home. I pulled into my driveway, the engine purring to a stop. My house looked just as it always did, peaceful and welcoming. I stretched, yawned, and then reached for my garage door opener, ready to unpack my fishing gear and finally relax. The garage door whirred to life, slowly, agonizingly slowly, lifting upwards. As it rose, a wave of stifling, suffocating heat rolled out, hitting me like a physical punch. It was followed by a sharp, pungent smell, a mix of stale air, something chemical, and a cloying, sickly sweetness that made my stomach lurch. My eyes widened in alarm. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. The garage looked like a disaster zone. Boxes were strewn everywhere, tools lay scattered, and there was a dark, oily stain on the concrete floor, glinting ominously in the dim light. It looked like a tornado had ripped through the space. And then I saw her. Brenda. She was lying in a heap behind the overturned stack of tires, almost completely hidden from view. Her perfect, ironed clothes were torn and filthy, covered in dust and grime. Her usually neat hair was matted and wild. Her face, oh her face! It was swollen, pale, and covered in a week's growth of dust and sweat. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her eyes sunken and wide, staring blankly at the ceiling. She looked like a ghost, thin and frail, barely human. Her chest moved, a shallow, ragged breath, but it was so faint I had to lean in to be sure. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden, cold terror gripping me. Brenda! I gasped, stumbling forward, my fishing rods clattering to the ground. Brenda, what happened? I knelt beside her, my hands shaking as I gently touched her arm. It was burning hot, almost feverish. She didn't respond, only a weak, gurgling sound escaping her lips. I could see the cuts and bruises on her arms and legs, the way her knee was swollen to twice its normal size. She looked utterly broken. Suddenly, a glimmer of movement. Her hand, weak and trembling, lifted slightly. In her dirt-caked palm, clutched so tightly it looked like it was fused to her skin, was a crumpled, mud-stained piece of paper. It wasn't her clipboard. It was a single, folded page torn from what looked like a child's drawing book. With trembling fingers, I gently pried it from her grasp. It was a clumsy, childlike drawing of a sunflower, brightly colored with crayons, next to a wobbly stick figure drawing of two people holding hands. Scrawled underneath, in a shaky, almost unreadable script, were two words, "Be kind." A siren wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. My terrified shouts, the frantic call I'd made to 911 the moment I saw her, had been heard. Neighbors, drawn by the open garage door and the wailing siren, started to gather at the end of my driveway, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Linda, my neighbor, gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. The ambulance pulled up, its red and blue lights flashing wildly, bathing the chaotic scene in a pulsing glow. Paramedics rushed in, their faces grim as they took in the sight of Brenda. They moved quickly, efficiently, checking her pulse, her breathing, carefully lifting her onto a stretcher. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, despair, and the lingering fumes. As they wheeled Brenda out of the garage, her eyes, barely open, flickered towards me. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw a tiny, weak flicker of something in them. Not anger, not her usual judgment, but something else. Something like understanding? Regret? I couldn't be sure. The paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, and the doors slammed shut, taking Brenda, the HOA Karen, away from the week-long prison of my garage. The siren faded into the distance, leaving behind a bewildered crowd, a silent, chaotic garage, and a single, crumpled drawing clutched tightly in my hand. The quiet suburb of Willow Creek would never be the same. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the silence of my garage had held a secret far more terrible than any rule violation.